Welcome to another episode of Josh Langley Gets to Know. Now, I've just finished reading a book called Pretty Girls, and it's fairly confronting. It raises a lot of serious issues: domestic violence, sexual assault, childhood trauma, and it was a confronting book to read. And I wanted to speak to one of the authors of the book. So I'm talking to Lisa Portolan, who co-authored the book with Samantha Macdonald, and I really wanted to find out why they wanted to write a book like this, what the story was behind it, and what they hope to achieve by writing such a confronting book. So let's get to know Lisa Portland and the book Pretty Girls. Lisa Portland, thanks so much for joining on my show. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great. Now, look, we're going to talk about your new book, the one you've co-authored with Samantha Macdonald, Pretty Girls. Now, it's a fairly confronting novel. Um, and then what I find is even more confronting is the fact that it's based on true events. Can you just give us
Mm.
a bit of a thumbnail sketch of what Pretty Girls is about?
Sure. Okay. So Pretty Girls is based on Samantha Macdonald's real life story, and so essentially it's set in Redfern in Sydney, and she returns the character Evie, who is a loose representation of Sam, returns from living in Melbourne to Sydney, to Redfern in particular, to meet with her father, who is passing away from cancer. And she has a really difficult relationship with him because there was a lot of domestic violence within the home, and particularly from her father's perspective. And that caused a whole heap of grief from her mother's perspective, from her brother's perspective, who suicided. And so she has to sort of reflect on all of these things that have occurred within her life and try to make peace with her father. And I think Eva returns home with the intent that her father's going to have repented in some way, or, on his deathbed, reflected on what's gone on within his
Mm,
life, and decided that, he wants to make amends with his daughter. But in fact, he doesn't acknowledge any of the things that have actually occurred, and sort of reframes the discussion in a way that he wants to believe has occurred. And so it's really quite tough for Evie to make peace with that. She's got her own daughter, she's a single mother, she's really had the repercussions of this relationship with her father have an impact on her entire life. And so her coming to peace with what's going on with her dad is really the entire narrative around the story. And she does meet, a love interest, she falls in love, all that sort of stuff
mm.
alongside of it. And she has a really difficult relationship with men throughout the entire novel, and and
It's
within her life.
understandable. I've read the book. It's understandable.
Yeah. And so she has a really difficult relationship with men and with trusting people generally.
Mm.
So she goes on a real journey, and it's not really until her father passes that she feels this release from everything that's gone on, and is sort of able to move forward. But the story is really, it's loosely based on Sam's life, and it's really about women claiming their story, or feeling
Mm.
like they can narrate their own story, even though it's a difficult one that might touch on some incredibly difficult issues as well.
Oh, look, I totally agree. It's empowering, but as you said, some of the topics raised in the book, there's a fair few. I'm just going to read them out because as I was reading along, I'm going,
Mm.
there's this issue, that issue. I mean, because you've got rape, sexual assault, domestic violence, drug abuse, drug addiction, mental illness, childhood trauma, sexism, racism. There was a
Mm.
lot in there. Did you think that maybe the book might be too confronting for people?
Look, I mean, I think we certainly thought there was a heaviness to the book,
Mm,
right? And even for someone, I wrote it and alongside Sam, and it is, based on Sam's story. So it was difficult even
mm,
writing. to be honest. You know, it was difficult writing it, was difficult reading it, it was difficult in the edit process, all that sort of stuff. But what we really wanted to do was to shine a light on these issues, and to, you know, give people, to give women and people more broadly, not just women, the opportunity to really claim their own stories and
Mm.
to move forward from them as well, because often we become defined by
Yep.
what situations that have occurred in the past. And so for us, it was the hope that, yes, it's an incredibly heavy book, but, you know, at the end, it sort of pieces people back together, and it sort of gives people a reason to move forward and to tell their stories, and to shed that skin almost.
Yeah, and look, you definitely get that element of hope that comes towards the end there, and I think that is so vital. How did you both emotionally prepare to go back into this trauma? I've researched a lot of childhood trauma issues myself, and I know that you can actually become re-traumatized by exploring these issues. And so, how did you guys cope with that?
Look, I think, you know, it was a difficult process. And just to give you some background, Samantha and I used to work together. And so I was writing at the time, and I actually was very close to my first book coming out. And she told me this story about that she wanted to revisit and tell. And at that point in time, she approached me and she said, "I really want to make a short film around Trop Fest, around my
Mm.
story." And I was like, and when she told me about it, I was like, we need to do this. We need to tell this story. We need to, you know, put it out there for people to experience and to learn from, and to, you know, to feel that they're not alone on their journey as well. And so we have revisited this story so many times. We made the short film, and then that
Mm.
was really successful. And then we made we actually wrote the longer script as well, because we had a lot of interest from a film production perspective. And then we wrote the book. So we have revisited this story so many times, and I think to some degree, you know, it has been a traumatic experience going back to all these
Yeah.
different elements. There were so many moments in this journey that both Sam and I thought to ourselves, we just can't do this. Or even, you know, when the book
Yeah.
was actually published and it was ready to go out, there were moments where we were both like, we just, you know, there was so much tension around the decision around moving forward with it, because
Mm.
it is so tough. And I also think it's been a real testament to Sam and I's friendship, because the book deals with such difficult subject matter. It's hard to collaborate from a creative perspective anyway, like on any
Oh, tell me
project, you
about
know,
it. I know. Yeah, that's very, very
there's
hard.
always a, yeah, cool. So it was difficult even from that perspective. So it's a real testament that we've come out, and that, you know, it's been received so positively, and that we feel like we did a good job in terms of putting it out there.
So
Yeah.
how did you work out who did what role when you're actually writing the book? How did you work that out? Like who wrote which bit and stuff?
Yeah, so look, I mean, obviously, because it is around Sam's life, she sort of indicates the key factors that need to be included and the key
Mm.
elements that need to be included. And I do a lot of the writing elements, and then she'll come in and sort of shape things in terms of, you know,
Okay.
what might have worked best in terms of, actually this isn't quite right, or this should be included. So it's more like, I wouldn't say that we write in terms of I write a chapter and she writes a chapter. It's more in terms of, you know, she's working on those initial ideas. I'm writing, we're revisiting and
Beautiful.
restructuring together. So it's a nice process. And, you know, I can't imagine how difficult it is if you were writing a chapter each, because as you would know, people have such different styles.
Your voice would be different, and that would be a bit jarring for the reader, wouldn't it?
Yeah, very different voices and all that sort of stuff. So, I mean, but we have a really great relationship. We've got a great collaborative relationship as well. So we take things on the chin. You know, sometimes
Mm.
when you've created something and someone's like, actually, I don't like this, or this doesn't work, it can be quite difficult to take that on board, because,
I
you know,
know. When
you've
someone says, "I think you should remove this bit," or "That's a bit wrong," you go, "Well, hang on, this is my stuff here," so you can take it a bit
yeah,
personally. But at least
yeah,
So it didn't ruin your friendship. It actually strengthened it because you both, because it's such an important topic. You needed to be together and write it together, and actually then send it out to the world together in that regard.
Yeah, that's right. It's definitely strengthened our friendship. And don't get me wrong, there were definitely tensions in terms of, different when we were writing, but also, when we were about to put out the book, and every single facet from the cover through to the quote that was included on the front cover, all of that sort of stuff, we sort of negotiated and navigated together, and we'd come back to each other, and we were texting because we're based in different locations now. So we were texting all through the day as we were getting up to the beginning of the process. And so the entire way, it was like a navigation of this. But if anything, it's been, a testament to our friendship. We've come out stronger. We've actually written something new together. So it's a great collaborative relationship.
Now, because you've got a Jimmy Barnes quote on the cover, how did that come about, and why Jimmy Barnes?
Well, I mean, Jimmy Barnes is a really strong advocate within this space. So he has really put himself out there around domestic violence, and around, you may have seen his story, and he's been featured in contemporary media around, his sister having suffered an incredibly violent relationship. And, so he has really put himself out there in terms of being an advocate and talking about a topic which, doesn't get discussed that much. Now, when we talked about Jimmy Barnes, we're both big fans of Jimmy Barnes. We love his music. We love everything about him. But at the same time, he's a guy. And so that was a bit jarring for us in terms of, having a man's quote on the front cover of the book, and something that we discussed a lot, about whether that was the right thing to do. We're both feminists. The story has a really strong feminist angle to it. Was it the right thing to do to put a male's perspective right up there on the front cover? And so what we eventually discussed was, we didn't just want this book to be about women. It is about women, but we wanted the book to include men, and we wanted to bring men along on the journey with this as well, right? And Jimmy Barnes is someone who speaks to men, right? And who they identify with. And so we thought, well, isn't this a great way to sort of draw men into this discussion? Because I guess to overcome big issues around domestic violence or whatever it might be, it needs that sort of that duality. So it needs both men and women working together.
Because I was going to say, you certainly need that, because without men being part of this story and needing to be enlightened by what's actually going on, because I was reading it and going, I am now getting an insight into how women feel, especially when they're looked on as not property, but what's the word, when men are leering, they're doing the wolf whistling, and they see them as just sexual objects, and how a woman would feel being perceived like that all the time. And that is something that me as a guy, I mean, look, I'm gay, so it changes the perspective a little bit, but it also gives me an insight into how women are feeling. And I think men need to read this book to get that understanding as well, to suddenly, what's it like to be in the other person's shoes? So what do you think? Have you got any feedback from men yet that have read the book?
We do, and we've actually had quite a few. Well, we wouldn't say quite a few. We've had a few guys also posting on social media around having read the book and supporting the book, and so their feedback has been that they absolutely loved it and enjoyed it, and see things from a different perspective, want to show their support. And I think that's to say, there's a lot of men out there who want to demonstrate support and who want to get behind this movement as well. And so that was an important facet for us, and the Jimmy Barnes quote is really quite emblematic in terms of doing that we wanted to demonstrate this is something that we need to work together around. Yeah.
Yep. Now that's good. I think, the more men that read this story that get a bit of an insight, the better. Now, there was one section in the book where that really struck home. It's when Evie's getting ready for her social, year 12 social, and her mum is helping her put the makeup on and get dressed up, and then the father comes home. and the father
Mm,
being the main cause of trouble in the house. I think
mm,
so many people could resonate with that, with the angry father figure. And the
mm,
way you described the Boots walking down the corridor as he's opened the
mm,
door, come home, and everyone just freezes. The whole
mm,
atmosphere in the whole room changes for just one person, and that feeling of fear that
mm,
invades everyone. I think the way you've written that and what happens afterwards, I'm not going to mention, but it's not pretty. But the way
mm,
you've written it and the way you've captured that feeling, because my husband his father was very similar. You know, as soon as he comes home from work, you don't know what mood they're in, and everyone's on tenterhooks, and you're
mm,
worried, and then you live a smaller life. And that's one thing you actually described it. You live a small life, a sheltered life, that
mm,
you, for fear of these people, these big male figures. And
mm.
and then it's not till many years later you actually realize you've been doing that. Then you can go, oh, I've actually been living a small life. And the
Yeah.
death of the main character's father, Evie's father, I think, as you said before, when he died, finally she could actually feel freer. And I think that's
Mm,
that's replicated in households right around Australia, around the world, in fact. So I just want to say, well done for capturing that feeling there, because I think
yeah.
it's something a lot of people can resonate with and go, it's not just me. I'm not alone with that. So I think that's
Yeah.
really great that this book will hopefully connect with so many people.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think and sorry about the pitter patter of small feet that you can probably hear on the floorboards around me. Those are my dogs just moving around in the background. You may be able to hear them, but
I can
at
hear the
some point in
tinkle
time,
tinkle of the of the name tags.
it's
What are their names? What are the dogs' names?
there's Apollo and Juno, and Apollo is, a 40-kilogram Labrador. So when he moves around, he can be quite noisy. So if you do hear him, that's what's going on. But look, I think that's an incredibly powerful scene. I totally agree with you. I think it resonates with so many people, that scene where, there's this person within the home that has so much impact on how everyone feels.
Mm,
And there is this element of constantly being on eggshells, because sometimes you never know what that person's going to be like. So they could be in a great mood, they could be in a bad mood, and you never can really tell. And the interesting thing is that often people talk about there's these subtle prompts that instantly they'll know that that person is in a bad mood. So it'll be the way that they walk in, or even
yep.
the way that they close the door, or the sound
And
of
and
their
that's a
key.
survival instinct. And that is
Yeah.
something, and that if you're a child and you've got to learn these cues to survive, and you could be a 9-year-old child, no 9-year-old child should have to be doing that. But that's what you
Mm.
have to do in order to survive, to know how to navigate
Yeah.
the scene, the situation.
I totally agree. And I think that, what we wanted to sort of portray was as well that there's so much complexity within those relationships and within those violent relationships, in terms of, um, both Evie and her brother were still to some degree seeking their father's love right
Mm.
until the end,
I know,
right? So
I know.
there's this complexity between, I hate this person and yet I still manage to love them. Where,
Mm.
how, and then there's a personal disgust as well, in terms of why am I experiencing these emotions. And so we wanted to convey that. We wanted to convey all those complexities, and we really hope that comes across in the book. But even with mother, for example, in terms of, there was this deep love for their mum, but there was also this sense that, she had failed them in terms of, continuing the relationship with
Yeah.
their father, but also in terms of, not being more protective, and not standing up more, because she was quite mentally unwell at that
Mm.
point in time too, and then physically unwell. So there was that what we wanted to show is that relationships are so deeply complex. Like, you never really just love a person. You can also feel all these other conflicting emotions that go alongside them as
And
well.
I think that is so important, because normally in the media, or what's portrayed is the or one side of it. You should leave them, or why do you put up with that? But with your
Yeah.
book, it actually shows how complex it is, and it makes other people go, I have those feelings too, and I still have to navigate
Yeah.
them. So it's normal to feel this way. It's normal to feel that way. And I think that is good that you've normalized it, so people don't go, maybe I'm really a bad person because I'm having these 3 or 4 different thoughts and feelings about the one person. You know, on
Yeah.
one hand, I want them to love me. On the other hand, I'm frightened. I want all these other things. And you're having this complex emotional tug of war. And what you've done, you've actually put that in the book really well to make people, even like me, go, oh, okay, that's normal to feel that. Thank you very much. So that's one of
Exactly,
the great gifts.
exactly. And Josh, I'm so sorry, but we're in the middle of this very deep conversation. My dogs have just wandered outside. So do you
Oh,
mind if I just shift off and then I'll
yes,
be straight back? Give me
yes.
two,
Oh,
2 seconds. Thank you.
okay.
Thanks. And I'm back. I'm saving it first.
It was the first. I have never had any guests walk off to go chase their dog. So that was the
And
first.
that's how real this podcast is.
I love it. Love it. Pretty Girls is going to be turned into a film. You told me just a little bit earlier you had the short film version for Trop Fest, but it's actually going to be turned into a feature film now?
Yes, correct. So basically, we started this process with the short film, and then we had all these production companies that were interested in the short film and wanted us to write a full script, which is something that I have never done before. Like as a writer, I have only ever done fiction and non-fiction, and so it was a completely different format for me to understand, because it's sort of like the dialogue is completely different and how it's framed is completely different. And so we wrote the script, and then it was picked up by a director, Sandy Greenwood, who is an Indigenous female director who has worked on a whole heap of different things, including The Matriarch, which was a one-woman show that toured across Australia and has had a lot of critical success. But she's worked with Robert De Niro. She's just worked with a whole
Wow.
heap of amazing, actors in Hollywood as well as in Australia. And so we were in the pre-production stage, but unfortunately, due to COVID, we've sort of had to, put things a bit on hold, which is totally fine. We're still hoping that things will pick up again going into the future, but we're just a little bit on hold, as you can expect, here on the East Coast. We've still got Melbourne in lockdown, and Sydney is, we're still on tender hooks as well. So, but hopefully we'll be able to pick that up towards the end of the year.
Yeah, excellent. I think that's something that people can look forward to watching, actually, to see Evie's story on the big screen. I think is it going to be on the telly, or is it more movies, or like
It's a feature film.
feature film? Fantastic. I think
Yeah.
it's going to be a great story that needs to be told, and a great Australian story as well. Now, you've started a podcast, moving sideways a little bit. It's all about dating apps and dating in this COVID-19 era. So, how has dating changed since last year?
Okay. So my PhD is on dating apps and intimacy. And so I started looking at how dating apps, Bumble and Tinder in particular, had shifted intimacy, or how relationships were facilitated, navigated, negotiated. So I started that a couple of years back because, I often think that love is sometimes overlooked in terms of being a really critical and important theme. And I think, love is the first place where culture and nature meet. And so it's, a location of incredible interest. And so I started off the PhD and I started working on it 2 years ago, and I'm in the process of, finishing up the second draft now. But I was in field doing research when the first lockdown happened here in Sydney. So that was in March of this year. And so that was very fascinating because at that point in time, people were reporting that their dating app usage had just skyrocketed. So people were saying things like, the phone keeps pinging at me. There's just, so many matches. And dating apps were corroborating that in terms of, they're coming out the statistics and saying there's been a huge spike in early March around the use of dating apps. And I think to some degree, you know, a lot of singles were looking to lock down a partner during that period of time.
Yeah.
And so I was, you know, out there talking to all these people about, well, and it was via Zoom because we could no longer be face to face. But I was talking to people about, you know, how their dating app usage had changed, if they were meeting more people, if they were talking to them more. A lot of them were saying, oh, you know, it's brought this Jane Austen-esque era of the Regency, a stance back where people are, you know, getting to know each other more rather than jumping straight to the hookup or whatever it might be. And so there was this concept around there being, you know, a slow love trend, a bit like slow food, you know, suddenly things have slowed
I like that.
down.
I
And
like
it's
that. A
great.
slow love trend. I like that. Yeah.
A slow love trend, yeah. And so when people were talking to me in their dating app interviews, I was just so moved by a lot of stories, because being a researcher, people come to you and they speak with such authenticity and vulnerability. And often you don't get that. Often, you know, when we're just in the face-to-face environment, even when you're in a relationship, there's a lot of performativity and there's a lot of, you know, well-meaning lies, like little white lies to sort of just, you know, get things over the line, or, you know, just
Yep.
keep the peace.
Yes. Yeah. Look, I know exactly what you mean.
And so people were coming to me and they were just like, I was like, wow, this is a real insight into the human condition. I know I can really connect with what you're saying. And so I chatted to this group down in Melbourne called Contento, which is part of Mondo Studio Films, which they've recently made quite a popular film called The Space Between. And I chatted to them about the director and the producer there about starting a podcast series called Slow Love, which documented people's journey during COVID and with intimacy. And we would, you know, just talk to ordinary people. We'd talk to infamous people. We'd talk to sexperts, to matchmakers, to whoever, you know, really wants to discuss this sort of space. And we did. And we kicked off the podcast last Friday. We launched
Excellent.
the podcast last Friday.
Yeah. So if people want to have a listen, how do they find the podcast?
So if people want to have a listen, go to www.slowlove.net.
Okay, I'll put it under here, slowlove.net.
Yes, and you'll be able to have a look at all of the stories there and click off onto the podcast. They will play instantly for you. You can also find Slow Love on Spotify, on Google Play, and all sorts of podcast apps. And you can also follow us on Instagram at Slow Love Stories.
Brilliant, brilliant. Now with Pretty Girls, where can people get Pretty Girls, a copy of Pretty Girls to read?
So Pretty Girls, you can get it virtually everywhere. So, you know, Big W is selling Pretty Girls, Jimmix is selling Pretty Girls, as well as a whole heap of independents. So, you know, the Berkelau, or Harry
Your local
Hartog.
bookshop. Yep.
Your local bookshop should have it. So just get on down there and get a copy, if not order it in. And I hope your listeners enjoy it.
Yeah, look, I think they will. Just quickly, how did you find a publisher for such a book? So I know you're with Big Sky Publishing, and they're a fairly brave publisher. So how did you find them?
Okay, so basically, so it's a kind of a long story, but you know, I've been published previously, and my I had a different publisher who went through a period of a little bit of uncertainty a couple of years back, and so then we were looking for a new publisher, and we approached. It's a funny story. I actually had a book by Big Sky on my shelf. I don't know, like being an author. I don't know if you ever like look at the who's published what.
I do it all the time. I'm going, ooh.
Oh, yeah. You know, who's published what, and you think, oh, I quite like that book. Maybe I'll approach them. And so I saw this book on my bookshelf, and I'm looking over there because my bookshelf is there. And I thought, let's approach Big Sky. And we did. And then we just absolutely loved Sharon and Di and everyone over there.
Brilliant team. Sharon and Di and Danny and Jody. Hi, how are you going?
Yeah. There was an instant simpatico with them, and we just thought, yeah, they're the people for us.
No, that's good. That's good. I mean, look, I know that they would love the themes of the book, and that's why they've obviously championed it. So, okay, so get the book from your nearest bookshop. Go to slowlove.net if you want to join the podcast. Look, Lisa, thank you so much for spending time with me.
Thank you, Josh. That was fantastic.
Thank you. Hi, thank you very much for watching the latest episode of Josh Langley Gets to Know. Got any questions? Whether you want to say whether you liked it, you didn't like the interview, and like my hair's too grey or something like that, post a comment below. I won't get upset, okay? Now, gratuitous plug here. If you want to grab my books, Being You Is Enough, Okay to Feel the Way You Do, or Magnificent Mistakes, or all three, just go to my website at joshlangley.com.au, because it's about trying to change the world one book at a time, helping one kid just to feel good about who they are and feel good in their own skin. If we can just help one child, then they may help another child, then another one, then another one, and then that's how we slowly change the world. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you next episode.